the Order in Progress podcast, where we explore the latest in jiu-jitsu strength, conditioning, mobility, and mindset methods to improve your jiu-jitsu and grappling performance. My name is Will Safford. Today we have Gianni Grippo. Gianni, as many of you know, is a top-level featherweight who is a black belt under Marcelo Garcia, and he is really one of the hardest-working guys in the game. Gianni is known for his incredible work ethic. He spends a ton of time drilling, doing things off the mat to improve his performance. And, it really shows in his record. He's competed and won at the highest level. He's competed in ADCC, the World Championship. He won the Pan Championship. He won the KASAI Championship in New York City. And Gianni just has a really interesting approach to jiu-jitsu. He really treats it as a professional sport. He's done work with psychologists and kind of like mindset coaches. And he's just in there every single day, grinding, trying to improve himself so that he can compete and win with the best in the world. So really excited for today's episode. As always, you guys can check us out at seekprogress.com. We just launched a brand new free ebook. It's a 4-week jiu-jitsu conditioning program. I know many of us have been off the mats for a while, so this program is designed to get your lungs, your heart, your body back in shape for the mats and ready to roll. So check that out at seekprogress.com. You can always check us out on Instagram at seek.progress. And if you guys are enjoying the podcast, we just ask that you leave a review on Apple iTunes, or if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, and we will continue to pump out awesome content. So without further ado, let's get into the latest episode with Gianni Grippo. All right, guys, welcome back. Today we've got Gianni Grippo on the show with us. Gianni, how you doing?
I'm all right, man. Who knows what day of quarantine now, but I'm doing all right overall.
It's kind of an interesting time because I feel like quarantine has allowed a lot of people to do a little bit of introspection and really dive into a lot of things that we can maybe do off the mat because we can't be on the mat right now. Mm-hmm. And I know I've known you for a couple of years. I've been following you for a while, and I know you're one of these guys who really finds a benefit and sees the benefit in doing the work off the mat.
Yeah.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that that's important for a serious grappler?
I think it's important to put the work in off the mat, both mentally and physically, because I've realized over the years it's such an important thing. It's such an important part to have. I don't feel like to even start it off, I never felt like you had to be incredibly strong for jiu-jitsu, but I feel like it was important to kind of be able to maintain or have a certain level of strength, or even have even focus on grip strength. I noticed that the toughest guys I would deal with were ones that would just be super hard to break their grips. So for me, strength training, I've gone through weird phases where I've done it a lot, I haven't done it a lot, but I've come to the realization that at least having some type of good muscular endurance is important. And then also being able to take care of yourself mentally as well has been such a big key for me as well. I've really noticed that all the years I've been training, my work ethic really hasn't changed. I've really spent a lot of time on the mat, but having a mental edge was what helped me in some tournaments, kind of get where I wanted to be. I feel like that's the key. Because all the high level guys are working at a high level. There's not much of a difference between the top few people, but I think it's being able to have that confidence, have that mental ability to push through tough situations in matches or tournaments that has people go further than others.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're big into the mental training. And, this podcast is all about how can someone get an edge for jiu-jitsu? And I think when you're at the lower belts and maybe you're not a competitor, you can do strength training and it's really going to help you. But when you're at your level, when all the guys are super technical, all the guys are really super strong, you've got to find those little things that will give you that edge. And it might be the mental aspect of it, which I firmly believe. I think that's what really separates people who win consistently and people who maybe have the skill set but are not getting on the podium.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about just kind of like the mental training and some of the stuff that you've gotten into over the years?
Man, so it goes way back. It goes back to even before I got my black belt, where I felt like I had like a period of time at the lower belts. And granted, I did well at the lower belts, maybe just through sheer will and technique. I basically won almost everything that I wanted to at the lower belts. But I do remember, like, I would always be conceding a lot of respect to my opponents. I wouldn't be kind of respecting myself or trusting my game as much as I could. And I remember I hit like a certain point where I stayed at brown belt even after I won worlds. And just because I hadn't been at Marcelo's for very long at that point. So it was like, okay, I kind of just had to, I couldn't just get my black belt at Marcelo's after being there for 3 months. That'd be a little weird. But so then I ended up doing no-gi worlds. And I remember being like super nervous about all these new purple belts coming up into brown. And the new purple belt coming up to brown that year was Marcio Andre. And I remember I had this whole nervous feeling about having to fight him. Like, man, I'm the brown belt world champ. I'm supposed to show him what's up. And I know how good this kid is too. I was thinking about him a lot. I was overthinking. And then I didn't even end up getting to fight him because I lost to someone else before. I was so worked up about having to face this guy in the final that I didn't even make it to the final. I lost in the semis. And I remember just like feeling like, man, I just didn't trust myself. I was just overthinking things. A lot of different negativity was going on in my head. And my dad took it upon himself because I never really, I always felt like if you opened up about, I wouldn't call it mental issue, but mental blocks, then there was something wrong with you. So I never thought about like talking to anybody or anything. It was kind of like something that wasn't quite as popular many years ago. But my dad found someone that he through clients of his own that he could trust, and he went to him. This guy Greg Chertok, I talked to him, and we developed like a really good relationship. And he's always like given me certain tools on how to properly mental train. Sometimes if you're getting worked up and anxious, you kind of have like a focal point. You just focus on a particular thing, or you focus on your breathing, kind of just be able to slow things down. Focusing on like what number you want to be, like between a 1 to a 10, like how, from 1 being the least intense to 10 being the most intense, where do you kind of want to be? We talk about visualizing before, a lot of different tools that we go over. I remember like the first few years would always be about like, learning new things. And then after a while, we've still been talking after, 6, almost 7 years. And now it's just kind of always being able to kind of bring you back to that point. Because what I've learned about the mindset is that even if you think you have something figured out, there's always going to be like little curveballs that come in your way that you have to deal with. I feel like I'd be the best example for that. Where I remember what was it 1 year, 2018, where I felt like I had a couple of really good tournaments. I'm like, I got this shit figured out. I almost don't need this anymore. I have it, in my head. But an athlete's mind, it can be a little fragile where, maybe one loss, you kind of start questioning yourself a little bit again. And it's hard to get back on track. And you need that person, or you need those mental tools to kind of recenter. You're never going to stay like this. You're always going to sway a little bit, but you just need to know how to kind of keep yourself, in that straight line, or at least be able to bring yourself back to that straight line. So I know I went on rambling a bit, but yeah, I have a long pass with that.
That was a lot of awesome info, man.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Speaking about that, like line and kind of always bringing it back, like confidence is such a funny thing. Like you can be like, you go out and win and you're building your confidence. Like you can go out and just win on sheer confidence. And I do feel like there's a lot of guys out there who are just so confident that they just believe, that they will not lose. They'll never lose. And a lot of these guys don't. Yeah. And then, but that can also backfire on you. If you get overconfident, you sometimes feel like you're invincible, and then you get caught, and then you kind of have to bring yourself back to that middle point, right?
Absolutely. I think actually what kind of led to me having a difficult stretch over this last year was that I went into the new year, or I went into 2019. I'm like, you know what? I won no-gi worlds. I'm not gonna lightweight. I'm not gonna cut weight for Europeans. I'm not gonna go back down to feather. I'm just gonna kind of do my thing. And I was kind of almost like kind of set on my ways, set on the techniques that I knew, set on how my mindset was at that point. And then I didn't perform well. I mean, obviously Levi is super good, and I lost to him there. But I think my mistake was that like I just assumed that once you figure it out a certain way, it's just going to work every other time.
Right.
You know, not the formula that works for you before mentally and physically, technique wise too, isn't always going to work forever. You have to be able to be adjustable. You know, and what I've learned a lot is that, you know, my mindset isn't always the same going into every tournament. Sometimes I'm laser focused. Sometimes I don't want to talk to anybody. Sometimes I have this type of energy that works. And then, you know, when you try to mimic that another time, you know, and you try to force that same type of feeling, it's not quite the same. You're trying to like, when you're forcing something, it's not so organic. So you kind of have to let yourself go with how you feel at that tournament on that day.
The one thing I wanted to ask you about was like, so like understanding these different, that you can't go out with the same kind of like tool set in a way, or like the same mentality and just bring the same mentality into every single match, because conditions change, things change, opponents change, right? But it sounds like this psychologist or this mental coach that you've been working with kind of gave you a skill set that you can use at any time to kind of help like self-regulate in these moments. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he'd always give me a bunch of tools. One thing I really liked was, you know, going over, and I kind of had, it's funny, he would give me these kind of rigid routines or rigid exercises to do. And at first I wouldn't do them because I always feel like I have to, like, if I'm going to do something, I have to do it 100%, you know? So I would go to him like, man, I'm sorry I didn't do my visualizing today, you know? But he's like, no, it's not supposed to be that rigid. You do it like when you feel comfortable. It doesn't have to be this selected time in the day, but just when you have a moment to kind of go over something in your mind, you know, it doesn't have to be, me, everything I do it so seriously that sometimes for me it was difficult to actually follow through. I'm like, I don't have the time for this. I can't handle adding this into my routine. So he would give me tools and then I would kind of make it into my own. But yeah, like one thing I always like to use as an example is, you know, just talking about visualizing before a tournament, and not even visualizing like my match itself, but even visualizing just coming into the arena, you know, kind of visualizing what my posture is like, visualizing, you know, how I'm interacting with people, because that posture and that kind of attitude that you give off kind of like, even if you're like a little unconfident or you're nervous before, kind of exuding confidence kind of gives you a confidence in its own way. So I always tried to like focus on that. Just think about how I was, you know, properly warming up before, or what I was thinking about before I go into the match, you know. So it wasn't even always, I would have other times where I visualized the match itself. But I think even just the build up to that first match is such an important thing to kind of understand. And I remember we were both in Brazil that one year for Brazilian nationals. And I remember being nervous because I knew I was going to be like one of the only Americans competing in it. So I would like watch video of like the old Brazilian national tournaments, like at that arena, kind of get a feel for what the arena was like, and kind of just visualize myself being in there, being maybe overwhelmed with being a minority in that group, being an American at that point, or in the minority at that point, and still being able to exude confidence and impose my game and do everything I do, and not allowing the overall crowd to overwhelm me at that point.
Man, that's interesting. To give the listeners and viewers the perspective, like that arena in Sao Paulo where the Brazilian National is held is like so loud. That is the loud. The fans in Brazil, they really get loud and they really support their own. And I remember you had Mansour in the final. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he, man, that was a wild final. But he is from, or he at least was training in Sao Paulo. So the place, and it was like you guys were in this back and forth battle, and it was just going like the place was going insane. So that's really interesting to get kind of the backstory on that whole thing. Like, yeah, what it's like putting yourself into the whole day, not just the moment, but the whole scenario is going to be like.
Yeah. And you know what? Even like, well, you know what's funny? Even though I lost that match, that was probably one of the more enjoyable tournaments I ever did, just because I love that energy. Even if it wasn't even for me, you know, I just love that in general, that energy entirely, because like I was there in 2004 and 2006 for Worlds in Brazil, like that, and that was kind of like the same kind of feel. So to have that, even if it wasn't really like in support, was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But also like what I would do like is visualize I think it was always important to visualize how I wanted the match to go, but then also don't just visualize how exactly you want the match to go, because it's never going to go exactly the way you want. You know, all of a sudden the guy resists a certain thing one way, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, hold on, I didn't train my mind for this. It's important to kind of be able to kind of see yourself in different scenarios, kind of properly dealing with bad situations and making them into something positive. You know, so I almost feel like that's the most important thing. Visualizing being able to calmly turn negative situations into something positive instead of just freaking out, you know, because maybe you haven't been in that spot before or whatever.
That's a great point, because in that particular match, there was a very questionable call. And it seemed like it took, like, you fought, I mean, both competitors fought so hard in that match. And then it came down. Was it a ref's decision?
Yeah, I knew I wasn't getting a ref's decision.
But what has your coach, or have you trained any techniques for like how to handle loss or like tough like decisions where you really have no control over, in a way?
Not really, I don't think. Well, actually, what I do focus on a lot though, and I think this is something that's been the most important thing for me when it comes to focusing on opponents or focusing on referees, you know, and that leads to anxiety that you really can't, and you can't really control that, you know. That's what leads to anxiety, because it's something you can't control. You can't control how your opponents are training. You can't control what their level is going to be like that day. Sometimes there's just competitors, it's just their day they're on, or sometimes there's going to be referees that they just aren't on with certain calls, and those are things you can't handle. So one thing that we would always focus on a lot is just going into training, going into competition, whatever it may be, any of the preparation before the tournament that day, just focusing on what I can control. And for me, that's focusing on my performance, my technique. That's it. Not even focusing on the result of the tournament, not even focusing on wanting to win, because sometimes, you know, you don't know, outside things might, you know, derail that for you without it really being your fault. So it's just important for me to like focus on just getting better every day in training, focusing on those small improvements, focusing on putting good, solid performances in each match, making as least amount of mistakes as I can. And I feel like if I do that, you know, most of the time I feel like the results will go my way. And I noticed a good trend where when I kind of took my mind off of just trying to win, you know, and instead just try to focus on doing my techniques right and kind of doing the smaller things, once again, focusing on what I can control, the results actually happened more than they didn't. You know, the results that I wanted were happening way more. So
wow, that's really interesting. I have so many questions about the whole psychology side of it, but are there any like resources that you like turn to, or books, or anyone that you study or follow that helps you with this?
I haven't read as many lately. I need to get into more. But one of my favorite books is Tim Grover's Relentless. He's the guy who trained Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and a bunch of other athletes. It was cool. Like a couple weeks ago, somehow I got into some like live Zoom meeting with him and like a bunch of other professional athletes. So I was on the meeting and I'm like, oh my God, this is him. You know, I'm a huge fan. But it was that was very motivational. It kind of talked about how to deal with setbacks and how to overcome them. What to do. He was in his meeting. He was talking a lot about what to do when you've been at the top and you kind of lost that edge, which is something I feel like I'm kind of going through myself, where I had a good moment and then I haven't had as great of a year this past year. So I felt like that was a conversation that spoke to me. So he's someone that I go to a lot. Bob Rotella's How Champions Think is another one. That was one I read a while ago, but I do remember it sticking with me. Those two are the first two I can think of. I know there's a good number of others that I've read, but those are the first two that come to mind.
Oh, that's great. That sounds like a great place for people to start. One thing before I get into like the actual physical training that you do, you mentioned that you do breath work and breathing and things, or just focusing on your breathing. I think the breathing is like, I've competed a few times, nowhere near the amount of times that you have competed, but I always find that like, if my breath is under control, I perform so much better.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Is there any like specific method that you use or anything that you're really into as far as the breathing?
I mean, the basics, like, 3 seconds in, holding it at the top for a bit. And it's not even about like that, but it's just focusing on something small. So what I was saying before, maybe it didn't make sense, but like when you get what I would do with my sports psychologist is when I would start feeling nervous or I would start getting annoyed. Like I had a habit of getting like annoyed in training when training wasn't going my way. So one thing we would say was like, what's something you can focus on like visually that you can like help you recenter or kind of remind you of where you are? Because I'm very competitive. And what happens sometimes in training, things aren't going my way. I'm getting pissed. I've been called into Marcelo's office too many times because of that. So we had a time where we had to focus on, okay, what can you do to kind of remind yourself that you're just training, that you're just, you're just practicing. This doesn't count for anything. So it'd be like a logo at the gym that I'd look at, for a second, like when I would catch my breath and be like, all right, I'm just here training. I'm just here learning and trying to get better. So that would help me kind of recenter and refocus on the training, because when you train angry or you train annoyed, like it's a downward spiral from there. Yes. If you don't catch it, it's, I'm sure everyone's had those days, but then you leave and you're like, man, I was just fuming the whole time. What did I get out of it? So those are the days you want to try to avoid as best as possible.
Totally.
And going back, what was your question again? I think
I was just about the breathing, but I think that's an interesting point. Like you use this cue to kind of break this cycle of like frustration that you had.
So that can go with breathing as well. You can really use that at the same time. If you don't use it visually, you can just kind of internalize it as well. For me, I always noticed that I would use that right before a match where I feel like maybe I'm catching myself thinking about my opponent too much, or I'm kind of getting too caught up in the situation. I'll give myself a moment to just take a deep breath, and I'll just, I'll bring myself back to what I need to do, to what I need to focus on. I remember one of my opponents when I was like a purple belt. And this is before I knew anything about breathing exercises. But Andres Bernovsky is a really good kid from Atos. I remember we used to go back and forth all the time. We'd have tough fights. And I always knew the first time I fought him, I knew he was like really good with triangles. He would just like triangle everybody. I remember the first time I fought him, before that at Worlds, he submitted like all 5 or 6 people at Worlds with triangles. So me, I was like really thin, like, man, this guy's going to triangle me. I was really nervous about it. And I remember I would be like driving to the academy, knowing I was going to fight this kid. And I would like start thinking about his triangles, and how he's going to fucking tap me with it. And I would just take a moment to just catch my breath and breathe. And it was just, then I stopped thinking about it and I just focused on myself. So even before I knew how important breathing was, I always kind of used that. So I always feel like that's really important.
Man, that's really interesting, because even if you're not a high level competitor, there's usually one guy in the gym who's in your head. There's always one guy who's always has your number, but you might be like the same level as him, but you feel like you should be getting them and you just can't stop. You're like, man. So that's a good little exercise that someone can. Because you're right. When you start like downward spiraling sometimes with like the thoughts, it doesn't help you at all. So using the breath to like, all right, let's just use this as my cue to get back focused and forget about that and just focus on what I can control. And that's my technique and training hard and doing what I need to do.
Exactly.
So you mentioned Marcelo earlier. I wanted to bring him up because I remember seeing this video on YouTube a number of years ago about how Marcelo like really didn't put a lot of value in like strength and conditioning stuff or like doing things off the mat. And he just always felt like all your effort should be put on the mat. And I think that, his record speaks to how effective that was for him. But this day and age, I feel like you kind of, to be at the highest level, you need all the mat time, obviously focus on technique and training and hard sparring stuff, but you have to also balance it out with some of the other stuff. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, maybe Marcelo at that time was able to get away from it based on the time that he was in. You see all sports are becoming more professional. You see the MMA fighters that like the champions that come one after the other are like always more professional than the other. I feel like someone like GSP kind of set the standard with that, where he did everything. He focused on his nutrition, he did his strength conditioning, he would work different sports. He didn't come from a wrestling background, but he was one of the best wrestlers because he worked on his wrestling. You see the same thing in baseball. These guys are getting bigger and stronger, not necessarily on steroids all the time, but they know that it's important to take care of their strength conditioning, to take care of their nutrition and stuff like that. Same thing with jiu-jitsu. So, Marcelo was like, first of all, I think he's like an anomaly because just the stuff that he does is just, it doesn't work for everybody. Like he can go in there in Worlds right now, and I think he can definitely like be right there with everybody. I'm probably being nice about that too. I would expect him to win. He's still that good, even though he'll train sporadically for the most part. But maybe it was also because of the times, where that was a little bit easier to kind of get away with that. Maybe, strength training at that point wasn't as big of a part of the game. But now it is for a lot of the high level guys. So if you want to keep up, it's not even getting an edge doing strength training, but it's being able to kind of, stay along line with everybody. It's a pretty important thing. I know not everybody does it. And it's funny because of Marcelo. I remember I went through a phase where I didn't do any strength training, and it wasn't a bad 2 years that I didn't do anything. I felt good in competition. I was doing well. But I was getting hurt more, I was dealing with that. And I felt like I was, I did feel like a little overwhelmed with some guys that would be really strong, and I could just kind of feel that difference. And it was like, you can fight technique with that and overcome that, but it's not always an easy thing to overcome, especially when the guy is very good too. Like I remember a couple matches with like someone like Tanquinho, I just feel like is like a solid brick for his size. I remember being like, God damn, I can't move this guy. What the hell? So obviously that opened my eyes to needing to having to go back into that a bit more. I had been doing strength training since I was like 10 years old, or maybe even younger, since I was like a kid. My dad would wake me up before school when I was like 7 or 8, and I would go on like a half-hour run with either him or my mom. And then I would come home, push-ups, chin-ups, go to school, and then I forgot what I was doing at that time. I don't know if I was training at that point, but I was doing something at that point. But yeah, that was like routine when I was still in like, elementary school and stuff like that. So I always kind of came up doing that type of stuff. And then I went with a bunch of different strength coaches and stuff like that. I always appreciated it, but I guess being at Marcelo kind of influenced me out of it for a bit until injuries came around, and then I realized the importance of it again.
Interesting. So I guess we know where your insane work ethic. You can thank your parents for that. At least part of it. But yeah, I think the injuries is a big thing. Like a lot of times strength training, like everyone, what's the magic bullet to not get injured? Strength training might be that thing, because it's going to stabilize your joints. It's gonna like prevent a lot of those situations where you're just not strong enough. Your body, you can't prevent the sweep. You can't prevent whatever it's going to happen because you just don't have the strength. And a lot of times strength training can help with that. But as I've noticed some of, watching some of your videos and your stories on Instagram and things like that, it seems like you're more into like the energy systems training these days. Is that more like what you're kind of into?
Maybe it's just kind of what you're seeing right now. I don't know. During this kind of quarantine time, like I haven't been, I was actually really kind of getting into lifting heavier again. I remember I went through a phase when I was a kid. My first strength conditioning coach, who like used to train Frank Yeager, Jim Miller, Ricardo Almeida, Vitor Shaolin, all these guys. I used to go there when I was a kid and work out with them. Martin Rooney, yes. Yeah, you know. But he was all about like heavy lifting stuff for the most part. It was a lot of that. And I thought that was good. I feel like I got pretty strong for like a 16 to 18-year-old. But I didn't know if it was very important for jiu-jitsu. So for me, like a majority of the stuff that I do is a lot of like lately it's been a lot of band work and a lot of like dumbbell and like kind of more fast, lightweight work. But occasionally I do kind of like the challenge of seeing, how heavy I can go with certain things on at least some exercises. But it's funny. Like I remember I was 18, I deadlifted 400 pounds. And then shortly after that, I hurt my back. And I remember I was like, I don't need to do this. I don't feel like it's quite, I don't need to know anymore. I just want to make sure that I'm lifting just to get stronger, just to get better. I don't need to challenge myself with certain numbers on certain things. But yeah, maybe just because like with the gyms closed and everything, I haven't had an opportunity to do that heavier stuff. But I do a lot of row machine stuff. I do a lot of band work. I do a lot of like dumbbell, like not super heavy type stuff. I feel like that's what's best for jiu-jitsu because, I'm not deadlifting 200-pound guys for the most part. Sometimes you have to do those kind of movements, but it's more like faster movements more than anything else. So I've been found to do heavier stuff overall being super important for jiu-jitsu at least.
Yeah, I feel like if you can get to a place with strength that's like strong enough, you don't really need to keep adding, like getting stronger, just chasing numbers. Like, no one you're facing is going to be 400 pounds. But actually, maybe there's that one guy.
There's like I said, there's a couple anomalies out there, but not too often.
But so do you also focus a lot on maybe some of like the more like I call them like metcons or like circuit training, things like that, for your weight class? Do you think that that's important for the lighter weight class?
Yeah, I think so. I think you mean like kind of like weight training, but kind of going from one thing to another kind of fast?
Yeah, I'm just more like the cardio aspect. I feel like the guys in the lighter weights just have all this endless cardio. And you're getting back to your fight with Francisco Manzor. I think it was that his name? Mm-hmm. That was just a battle and a grind for like 10 minutes until the last second. And it was just like the energy that you guys were both putting out there. And you had just fought like, 5 or 6 matches before that? Yeah. That's, to me, like, how do you train for something like that? Like, I feel like you need this endless strength, endurance, cardio. Your lungs have to be on point. So just kind of want your thoughts on like, the lighter weight classes.
Yeah. So you know what, like for me, like, I think that is important to do the conditioning off the mat as well, but I never really overdo it as well. I do it enough to like supplement my training. I'll do the row machine and circuits a couple times, like maybe like 2 or 3 times a week. I found these stairs near my apartment. I'll do that 3 times a week now. It's nice out, so it's a little bit easier to do at this time of year. So I enjoy doing that, but I think like once training goes back to normal, maybe it'll be like twice a week or once a week, because I had this thought as well where I would see some people, they would do strength training or they do cardio work outside the mat so hard that they were unable to perform on the mat. Mm-hmm. There was guys who would train at Marcelo's that were like all into the strength conditioning program. They would get so run down and beat up by the strength conditioning and cardio sessions that they would do off the mat that they wouldn't even, either they would train really poorly or they wouldn't train at all. So I found that it's important to have. I think it's important to do, but the training on the mat, even though we want to talk about the importance of training off the mat, the training on the mat is what's most vital. And the cardio off the mat is that's what gives you that edge. Doing that little bit extra that does it, but it shouldn't be a whole majority of that cardio work, I feel. That's like for me, yeah. Like I would do my sessions and then I would do like a quick row machine workout, and I know that's what's giving me the edge over everyone. But I know what gives me that cardio to be able to go, those hard matches is because I just spend a ton of time on the mat too. Yeah. It's just like jiu-jitsu cardio. It's a little bit different, where you're just used to being able to pace yourself properly and knowing when to pause and knowing when to go, because I spend so much time on the mat training that if I didn't know how to pace myself properly, I'd be gassed like anybody in about 10, 15 minutes.
Man, that's spoken like a true pro. You have to get that point where you're going to get a benefit, but you can't go to where there's diminishing returns. And now,
yes,
if you try to, and you can do that with anything. It could be you're doing too much yoga off the mat, you're doing too much whatever. You have to find that balance. And I think there's a little bit of like Marcelo's idea that like you can get everything from the mat. Yes, that's kind of true to a point, but you can also, it's all about a balance. You have to put your focus on jiu-jitsu, but then also find that balance with those other things outside.
Yeah, I find it super important. I remember like I said, I bounced with a bunch of different people. I would have days where I would come into training. I just like, my legs would be completely wrecked. And I could barely even walk, and yet I'm going to go train. And I'm like, this can't be good. This can't be right. I don't need this. If someone wants to, kill themselves with like leg days, then they go be a go be like a professional weightlifter. That's not my job. So I felt like it was important to do it to an extent to where I gained that edge, but not necessarily wreck myself to where you start having like those diminishing returns in training. I realized that I want to make sure that all my energy should go into training and I leave everything left for the strength or conditioning work afterwards.
I just had a guest on last week, and he was telling me that his favorite conditioning tool is the Airdyne bike, which
I think sucks.
is absolutely brutal. But man, I don't think the rower is much better. The rower is awful.
No.
Why do you what makes you inclined to use the rower?
So I used to run cross country in high school. I used to run a lot. I started running with my parents when I was a kid, but I hit like a certain point where running just hurt. I just took a beating doing that. I even went for like a 10-minute jog the other day and my knees just felt terrible. I don't know if it's because of jiu-jitsu or what. Actually, my dad would always bike next to me because he used to do triathlons. He did the Ironman Hawaii and Escape from Alcatraz and all these crazy races. And his knees are so messed up that I've never seen him run in my life. Wow. He would always bike next to me as I would run. Wow. But I don't know if we have the same genetics with that. My knees suck, so running for me isn't something is what I like to do. Honestly, I would rather have if I'm going to have anything, I'd rather have like a stationary bike. But it's my roommate that got a row machine for the apartment, so that's what I'm kind of stuck with. That's pretty much it. I do like it, though. It's a little bit more engaging, but it sucks. It sucks, yeah. It sucks to do for a long time. I'd rather do the sprints, but me and Lovato were kind of going back and forth. I really was interested. He was posting some challenges during the quarantine time, and I wanted to try to match his numbers. It was very hard. I don't know how he did it. He had some pretty high. He had a pretty high pace, but I was trying to keep up with that. It wasn't easy.
Lovato is in incredible shape. I've actually spoken with his strength and conditioning coach, and he's got a really interesting take on the whole thing too. But with the rower, I actually rode for a year in college. Someone who's really long and tall has a massive advantage on the rower.
That's what he was saying as well. Okay, so yeah.
So that's where you might have.
I just need to get one of those torture devices and stretch me out or something.
But speaking of, so people who don't know you, you are the first guy on the mat doing drills. They call it Gianni's corner, right?
I call it, but then I think everyone else calls it.
Everyone else. And then you're the last guy, and you guys could do 10 rounds of 10. You're going to do 2 more rounds of 10 afterwards. You work incredibly hard. I remember one time I saw you and you were like, man, I'm feeling kind of beat up. And I was like, why don't you take a day off? And then you took a day off and you felt great. But how do you combat all of this energy that you're putting out? What do you do to recover, to balance out the system?
Well, that's something I've needed to figure out, because I enjoy the hard work. I really do. And it's not something to be this is what I do. And I'm not trying to do it to be, to prove something or to be the tough guy or whatever, or to show that I do more than anybody else. But I do it because I have the time to, and also just because I like that. I really do. It's something that I really enjoy doing more than anything else. So I haven't done a great job at recovering. I don't give myself as much time and energy into doing that as I should. And I noticed a difference. I noticed that I started feeling, as I get a little bit older, I started feeling more run down at the end of a hard week of training, to where I wasn't recovering the way I would like. I started getting into ice baths and stuff like that, which are brutal, but I felt the difference. I started realizing there are nights that I should take off. So I figured out something where I can train super early in the morning, maybe in the afternoon, and then have the rest of the day to be able to kind of just rest. Because I noticed that what was really wearing me down was the night sessions every night, doing afternoon, night, Monday through Friday, and then doing an open mat training on Saturday, and then drilling on Sunday. I was feeling shot. So what I would do is I would mix it up and maybe do a few early morning sessions with a few of the hobbyists at Marcelo's, at the 7 a.m. practice, and then do Marcelo's class at 12:30 and then be done for the day. And I feel kind of having that afternoon and evening to kind of just be able to spend some time recovering helped out a lot. So kind of just giving myself a larger window of recovery time. So it kind of required me to just kind of change my schedule. I'm not sure if I'm training any less, but somehow just trying to find more time to not just be on the mats was something I felt like I needed to do. And it wasn't even just for physical well-being. It was more for mental well-being as well. I started noticing that, like, shit, you know, what else do I do off the mat? I need to, you know, I need to find some kind of balance a little better, which I felt like was important. I remember, like, the longer I'd be on the mat, the more I kind of get frustrated with my life sometimes, or what I'm doing. And I know I'm doing, I enjoy what I do, but I need to, the only way to kind of enjoy that is to also have something else to kind of go towards as well, you know? So yeah, all that's kind of a reason why I shift my schedule a little bit.
Gotcha. And I feel like a little bit of that came just through maturity and, like, listening to your body and, like, maybe learning the hard way, like, shit, I'm kind of feeling a little burnt out right now. I need to find something to balance it out.
Well, yeah, I remember there was I think what made last year really tough was all of a sudden, like, every weekend I was, like, getting sick or getting run down, just because Thursday, Friday would come around. I'd just be like, oh, I feel horrible. You know, I just would overdo it all the time. And then that led to me, like, getting sick before a tournament and then just deciding not to do it. I think it was before, like, a London Grand Slam or something. I was like, man, I've just felt horrible for days. I'm like, I think I need to take time. So I didn't do last year's Pans or anything like that either. I was just like, you know what? Let's just take a little bit of a break and just kind of get away from it a bit and kind of just slow things down, kind of make it a little bit more like hobbyist style for a couple of weeks or a month or something. And I felt better after that. I kind of felt refreshed. So I realized that I need to give myself those little periods of time to kind of just reset at least.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think, like, if you look at wrestlers, you have this short window, right? It's like 4 years in college. They may have, like, a few years after college to, like, train for the Olympics. But they have such a short window to get, you know, as much wrestling, as much mat time, and as much competition as they can in, and they just grind their bodies to the bone. And then, like, many of them, you never hear about this, but, like, later on in life, they've all got, like, I think Dan Gable's replaced, like, every joint in his body.
Oh, mess. Yeah, I've heard.
I don't know if jiu-jitsu guys, like, our window seems to be a bit longer, right? It's kind of like your 20s to your 30s, still a shorter window. But and I guess maybe we're not going 100% every single training. But have you ever thought about that? Like, maybe, like, later on in life, what your body's going to be like, because you're putting all this mileage on now?
Yeah, I kind of know I'm screwed. I kind of know I'm screwed, you know, but I think I've come to terms with that. My dad is someone that's, you know, he's healthy. He's taken care of himself his whole life, but he deals with his crap because he's done a lot. Not only has he done triathlons, but he's been skydiving his whole life. So he's had, like, over 6,000 jumps. So that's, like, takes an impact on you when you land every time. So that's another reason why his knees are a mess. You know, he deals with heart issues and stuff like that. And, you know, he's got his ailments, but I was talking with him the other day. I was hanging out with him on Father's Day, and he's like, you know, I asked him, you know, I think he has this realization that he's getting older, and he started just going on a tangent. He was like, you know, I don't think I'll regret anything, you know, whenever I'm about to die, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't think I'll regret anything because I did absolutely everything I wanted to. I worked hard and competed in this race. I was able to compete there. I competed in all these different places. So I think you kind of have to be able to accept that, like, yeah, maybe those back end years, you could feel it a bit, but as long as you feel well spent, well used, you used everything that was given to you. Right. I think I find a satisfaction in knowing that I did that, rather than, you know, if you don't have any aches and pains on that last day, then you probably didn't do everything you could have done.
It's a great point, man. You know, you might get to that point one day and regret not working harder. You know, like, I didn't work hard enough. But if you go there and you're all banged up and you got a couple medals on the wall and you know that you gave it everything you got, I don't think there's anything that you should, you know, be regretting at that point.
Yeah, I think that's the way you want to be. You want to be like, okay, I'm done now. You know, I've done everything. I don't want to deal with this crap anymore. But if you feel like you still have something in you, then that's where you kind of didn't leave everything out there. You know, you want to make sure that you did everything you could.
Yeah, 100%, man. Well, let's, I wanted to wrap it up, but I wanted to ask you, I always ask everybody, is there any supplements that you really kind of believe in and that you use on a daily basis?
Oh, you know what's funny? Actually, during this time, like both of the GNCs that I go to have like closed down. So I have been like going real natural. I just, have nothing right now. So I can't even remember what I used to take. I used to take a lot. I remember my Martin Rooney used to say, you should be taking this, this, this,
Yeah.
this. I'm like, wow, that sounds like a lot. And I didn't really listen to him. But just through like natural progression, I started taking pretty much everything he told me on my own.
Gotcha.
It would be like, fish oils were important. I would take glutamine, sometimes creatine. I would take, calcium pills. I can't even remember. Just so many different things is probably ridiculous, but no crazy supplements. No, I don't take like too many like protein supplements or anything like that. Pretty straightforward, not too much to be there.
Kind of the standard. But then I also wanted to ask you about, you just started this tape company, Griptape, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Now, I've never been a tape guy, but if you're a tape guy, you have every single digit taped up. Like one of my coaches, Andre Galvao, tape guy, man. Before he fights, his hands are just covered in tape. What is the big thing about tape?
So it just for me, actually, it just gives me a little bit more of a mental support as well. Because I went through like a period of time. I remember it was actually in Brazil that time I was training in Sao Paulo, and like those guys break grips really hard. They just do everything hard. And I remember like every time I break my grip, I'd be like, damn, my hand, it would just hurt. My grips would hurt. And just kind of taping it up and kind of having that support and feeling like it was a little bit of more of like a stiffness, like kind of like a rigidness. Where you could still move, you could still make grips and everything, but it just kind of made it a little bit easier for when guys broke grips. It wasn't just going to like snap your fingers there. It wasn't going to mess up your joints quite as much. So it kind of just brought like a peace of mind that everything's going to kind of stay in place. I do feel like it has its benefits physically, but for me, it was very mental as well. Just to be like, okay, I'm not just going to hurt my hand or hurt my fingers this way, because just having no I don't know what's the word, control or anything like that, or support's the word. And having kind of no support for your fingers, I felt like hurt way more. So just adding that, it feels like makes such a difference. So for me, it started off with like, oh yeah, this one I'll tape up because, this one's like really bad. But then it started like slowly turning into 2 and then 3. And then I make a joke that like, Monday I'm taping like 1 or 2 of them. By Friday, I'm taping all like 8 of them. It's always how it is. But yeah,
that's a great point, man. I never thought about the mental aspect, but I totally know what you're talking about, because I had my knee scoped in 2018, and I have to wear a brace every time. The knee is fine now, but if I go out there and I don't have my brace on, I'm like, I'm worried,
Yeah.
Just that total mental aspect. I totally get that. That's interesting, man. Cool.
Yeah.
So what would be, to wrap it up, what would be your final word of advice for someone who's just for any grappler out there?
Oh, it's a loaded question. There's a lot of advice I can give people, but I think everyone like prioritizes their time on the mat, and that's super important. I always say, like, for people who don't have the time to train multiple times a day, a lot of people would ask me, what should I do? Should I do jiu-jitsu or should I do strength training? I'm like, I think it's always best if you only have a choice between one or the other, that of course strength training should come at a time, but if you have to choose between one or the other, you should choose jiu-jitsu over that. I think technique is what conquers everything. And the strength training is what helps us get that edge, or be able to maintain a strength, be able to prevent injuries. So the mat portion for me is always going to be the most vital, but you just need to be able to balance it right. And also realize that you can't just go in there with just technique or just strength. You need to focus on the mindset as well. I think that's very important. It's a very important tool that I didn't realize would be as important as it is. And you hear a lot of interviews. I'm sure you've done a ton of interviews with competitors as well. And they ask like, oh, what was the key to you winning that tournament? It's like, man, my mind was in the right place. They never mention anything about the technique, but they don't even know how to explain it at that moment. But it's always just being able to get your mind in the right place, and also being able to accept that you're not going to be able to keep that mindset. every time, that you're going to have to be able to make adjustments, even at the highest levels. You have to know, like, okay, maybe this worked for me before, but I'm going to have to continue to evolve and improve myself, because the same thing isn't always going to work, because it's different competition, because it's a different day, because you have different expectations, whatever it may be. So you need to be able to be adaptable and adjustable.
Awesome, man. Great stuff. Where can people go if they wanted to check out your tape company and look you up or anything like that?
Yeah, so you can go on to griptape.com, GRIPP tape.com. We kind of made it for my name a little bit. There's an Instagram page at Griptape, GRIPP tape. Or you can find me just at Gianni Grippo, GIANNIGRIPP.
Awesome, man. Are you, do you have any fights coming up or anything? How's the future?
I don't know. Like, yeah. I see fight to wins and it's killing me. I'd love to do one again, but I feel like I've been able to train, but very, like, there's like a minimum that I'd want to be training to go compete again. And I haven't really hit that minimum yet. I'm kind of training like every other day based on like a quarantine partner's work schedule. So it's not quite conducive to fight high level guys right now. But I'm hoping before the summer ends. I think that would be a nice goal in mind to try to get on a card.
Right on, man. Well, I personally can't wait to see you out there. And thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Of course. Thank you.
All right, brother. Take care. All right, guys. There you have it. As you can see, Gianni is a super hard worker. He's put in a lot of effort off the mat to try to improve his jiu-jitsu performance. Obviously, like he said, the most important thing that you can do is get the mat time, work on your technique, get those hours in on the mat. But there's a lot that you can do off the mat to help supplement those things that you're doing. So one thing that I thought was really interesting was the whole psychological side. You don't really hear a lot of professional jiu-jitsu athletes working on the mental aspect of the game, but Gianni has put in years working with a mental coach to help him in those scenarios, help him maintain a winning mindset, and help him just compete at the highest level. So again, if you guys enjoyed the podcast, feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a review on iTunes. As always, you can check us out at seekprogress.com. If you want to learn more about Gianni, you can check him out, griptape.com. That's grip with 2 P's, tape.com. He's also on Instagram at Gianni Grippo. And if you guys want to learn more from us, check out seekprogress.com. We just dropped a brand new ebook. It's a free 4-week conditioning program that we've got right there for you guys on the homepage. So be sure to check that out as well. And thanks again, as always, for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode.